Because he practices what he preaches well, the next speaker has an avid fan base across the world. Whether you're freelancing and looking for your next client, or employed and thinking about your next permanent gig, a solid personal brand will help you stand out against the crowd. Get your note-taking resources ready. It's time to learn how to elevate your profile and increase your value, leading to better opportunities, more money, and a successful career. Allez, 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 which is reference to the soccer chant of his favorite footy team, Aston Villa. Let's go learn from Ant Pugh.
Wow. Thanks so much, Kim. What an intro. Right. Well, yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to be talking about personal branding today for learning designers. My goal is to, really explain what a personal brand is and help you understand why a personal brand might be a good idea for you. And most importantly, give you some kind of practical advice that you can use if you decide building a personal brand is the best thing for you to do. A lot of what I talk about today is going to be anecdotal, sharing some of my own experiences and some of the things that I've learned in building my own personal brand, and just give you an insight into some of the decisions I've made and how this has impacted me. So I like to start with why. Whenever I start a project or a new business or a new project or a new piece of e-learning, I think starting with why is something that's really important. And if we did that more often, we'd end up with better results. But that's a topic for another conversation. So why would you want to create a personal brand? Well, the way I look at it is that I think a personal brand is a really safe way to invest in your own future. Whatever you're what you're investing in is time. So you're investing in something that can never be taken away from you. And if you think about what we've been through this year, this is a great example. We've seen people losing their jobs. I've lost clients. I've seen my students losing clients and contracts. And the world's gone a bit crazy, hasn't it? But the one thing that can never be taken away from us. We might be able to, we might lose our job, we might lose a client, we might lose a project, but the one thing that can never be taken away from us is our reputation. So the chances are, if you're applying for a job or speaking, to new clients, whether you're, working in a full-time job or whether you're freelance, the chances are the people who you're looking to impress are researching you online. So having a strong personal brand is really going to give you more opportunities and help you stand out against the crowd. And got a quote from Jay-Z here. I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman. So obviously Jay-Z has an incredible personal brand himself, but I think this is really interesting. So whether you're a student or whether you're working for a company or you're working for an agency or you're freelance, you need to start thinking about yourself as a business. And, if you think about your parents, think about your uncles and aunties and grandparents, historically, they would have been working for the company that they worked for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Nowadays, the average duration of employment is 3 or 4 years, and if you're in your 20s and 30s, it's even less than that. You're looking at like maybe 2 or 3 years. So when you start thinking about it in those terms, if we, let's imagine that an average career is 50 years, and you're getting a new job every 3 years. I can't do the maths, but let's imagine how many opportunities, how many times are you going to need new opportunities? And that's if you're in full-time employment. If you're freelance, you're probably looking at 3 or 4 new opportunities every year at least. So the amount of times you're going to need to kind of impress people and put yourself out there is going to be a lot throughout your career. So I'm going to ask a quick question. Can I request some help from the poll master, whoever's doing this? My question is to you guys. Do you have a personal brand? I'm really interested to find out if any of you guys out there, just give me a yes or no, a thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you have a personal brand?
All right, so give it to Ant. Do you have a personal brand? Ooh,
it's very strange talking to my camera and knowing that there's people watching, because usually when I make my videos, I talk to my camera and I can edit it all out afterwards. So this is kind of strange.
All right, here you go, Anne. So the results are majority are no, 75% no, 72% no, 28% yes.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, what I'm about to say then might be a bit controversial, but my argument would be that everyone has a personal brand. And the reason I say that is that personal branding, I think, is much more than having a logo or having a social media presence or having a blog or a YouTube channel or a website. And then, so that then raises the question, what is a personal brand? And the best description that I've heard, about personal branding and what a personal brand is that a personal brand is what other people say about you. So, as I said, regardless of whether you're, on social media or whether you have a blog or a YouTube channel or a podcast or a website or a portfolio, it's actually all irrelevant because your personal brand is what other people say about you. Now, that might only be 20 people, the people that you work with or people, in your office. But their opinion forms your brand. It's not what you say you are. It's not your logo on your website. It's what people say about you. So if we think about all the people we interact with, it might be clients, it might be colleagues, it might be your manager, it might be your peers, it might be your LinkedIn connections, your Twitter followers. Anyone who interacts with you is building up an opinion of you. Of who you are and what you stand for. And if we think about all the interactions we have on a daily basis, obviously at the moment, most of it's online, but usually it would be in the office. We'd be meetings, chatting to people, conferences, meetups, events, having lunch in the canteen. Obviously we're online now. So Zoom calls, phone calls, emails, Slack conversations, Twitter, WhatsApp group, LinkedIn, these are all different ways, different touch points where people are interacting with us. And every time they interact with us, every time they interact with you, they're forming an opinion of you. And so surely then, if we're in agreement, and you might not be in agreement that you do have a personal brand, but if you start thinking in this way that, you already have a personal brand, surely it makes sense to start being intentional about it. And the good news is that doesn't mean you need to start an Instagram account tomorrow, documenting everything that you do or plastering yourself all over the internet. That's not what personal branding is. This is just a tactic that people use to develop their brand. And we'll talk about tactics later, but that's in itself, that's not personal branding. And the great thing about personal branding is that you can do as much or as little as you like. And it's just a case of finding something that resonates with you. And the thing I always think about this is if you do something or if you're thinking about doing something and it feels a bit icky, it doesn't quite sit right with you, it doesn't feel right in your gut, it's probably not the right thing to do. So that's the great thing about personal branding. You have to do what feels right to you. But it just means you need to start thinking a bit more strategically about what message you're putting out there. Start to create some consistency in your brand and just make sure it reflects who you are and what you stand for. Right, so what I'm going to do next is walk you through a process that you can follow to develop your personal brand. And to give you some background, I want to tell you about how I learned about this. So I actually recruited a branding consultant last year who helped me refine my own personal branding. So I've completely cheated with my presentation today. I'm just going to be ripping off everything I learned from this process. But just to set the scene, I worked in the corporate world as like a learning designer, training manager, learning consultant. And then when I started freelancing, I was developing custom e-learning from, to start off with, it was anyone who wanted it, just desperate for customers. Then I started being a bit more specific and I started focusing on creating software training. Originally, it was for anyone. And then I narrowed it down even further to SaaS companies. And that was a service called Video Bytes. And it was around the same time that I started making YouTube videos as well. So things were a little bit all over the place. And not to mention, during that same time period, I started a family. I started traveling. We'd literally sold all our stuff and we'd moved over to Asia. And then we moved to Australia. So things were a bit chaotic. And I felt like I was going in lots of different directions, but not really making any progress. I felt like I was so interested in so many different things and so passionate about doing so many different things, but I didn't really feel like I was getting anywhere. And so this process, this branding process I went through, it was much more than just, getting a new logo. It was really a process of helping me figure out what I was passionate about. And it gave me clarity and focus on where I should be channeling my energy. And so I thought it'd be fun to go through that process with you guys today. So the way the process was explained to me was that it would be like holding a mirror up to yourself. And I really love this quote. It's hard to read the label from inside the bottle. And I think it's so true, isn't it? It's so easy to look at other people's situations and give constructive advice, to help them. But when we try and apply that same logic to our own situations, we can get kind of overwhelmed and a bit confused. And I'm not saying that you need to go out there and hire a branding consultant, although I think, investing time and energy into this is going to help you save a lot of stress. But just having somebody to work through this stuff with, it's really important. And so if you can think of a colleague or a mentor or somebody who knows you, who isn't just going to say what you want to hear, but is going to give you some really objective feedback, I think that's really going to help you get through this process. So what we've got here is a loose framework for the process that I went through when I went through this process last year. And we can see here the steps. So step one is to develop your brand. So this is figuring out how you want to be perceived. We obviously can't change who we are, and we shouldn't want to. And we can't change what people think about us, but we can influence them and make sure we're being intentional about the message we're putting out there. The next step is to define your focus. So figuring out who you're going to help and how you're going to help them. Excuse me. And the last part is a bit more tactical. So how are you going to grow your brand through delivering value? Should you start blogging? Should you start a YouTube channel? Should you start a podcast? Should you get active on LinkedIn or Twitter? There seems to be so much advice about tactics and how to promote yourself that it can just become completely overwhelming. So I'm going to focus a little bit of time on that as well today. So the first step is to develop your brand. And I found this to be the most difficult step because it's quite abstract. And it's all about pulling together the most important aspects of what makes you who you are. So I'm going to talk you through a few of the exercises that we did to help me kind of to work through this process and uncover these things. So one of the first things we did was to identify which values were most important to me. And obviously this is a little bit woo-woo, and the only time I'd ever done this before was when I was starting to look at values for companies, like when I was working in the corporate world. So I think we were doing some training on corporate values and things like this. Which is very, very abstract when you're talking about a business, but I think it's a bit easier when you're talking about an individual because we know what resonates with us. And this is just a list of all the values. You can find these lists online. If you just type in a list of values into Google, you'll find PDFs with these types of things. And this definitely isn't finite. There are probably thousands of these words that we can, or these values that we can look at. And the exercise was to narrow it down to my top 20. So go through and put highlight the top 20 that resonated with me. I think I came out with lots more than 20 to begin with. Then I had to narrow it down to 10, and then I had to narrow it down to 5. And so this is something you can, have a go and doing yourself. And you can see here, I've just highlighted on the screen for you, my top 5 values that I came to. And it would be interesting to hear back from you, whether you've watched any of my videos before, you've read any of my LinkedIn posts, or maybe just from listening to me talking for the last 15 minutes. It'd be interesting to hear whether you think these values actually reflect, me and my brand. Maybe I'm not doing a very good job of it yet, but this is the kind of the path that I was going down. But remember, your brand is what other people say about you. So I can say all these things that that I value, but that's irrelevant if other people don't believe them. The next exercise was to write out as many stories and as experiences as I could. So not just work related, but everything about my life, right through from childhood, through going to college, through going, starting my career and growing up. And, as I said, not just work related, everything that's had an impact on you in your life. And it doesn't have to be positive stuff, and it shouldn't be positive stuff. It should be that, all the different things that have come together to make you who you are. But just getting this stuff down on paper is so therapeutic. And the interesting thing is that you already know all of this stuff, and you're probably sitting there thinking, well, I know all these stories. Why do I need to write them out? But until you actually get them down on paper, it's quite difficult to start, pulling things out that are, recurring patterns, recurring threads that you might not be aware of. We did exactly the same exercise with talents and passions. So not just work related, but figuring out when am I in my genius zone? When am I in a state of flow? When am I doing my best work? And by identifying those moments in time, you start seeing patterns, and you can start thinking, well, how am I going to work more frequently in those states of flow? And interestingly for me, what came out of this was that I was really passionate about teaching. And this was a thread that came out of lots of different stories and lots of different, things that I was talking about. And I knew that already. That's the reason I got into e-learning and instructional design in the first place. I knew that I enjoyed teaching, and I was excited about bringing kind of my passion for technology and design into that and teaching through e-learning. But I think going through this process helped me realize that instructional design and e-learning was actually a world away from teaching, which is what I really loved. And getting back to that was really important for me. And so what I got out of this was a bit more clarity about who I am and what I stand for and what I'm most passionate about. And that helped me start thinking about the way I wanted to take my personal brand. Now, the next part of the process was to start thinking about how this ties into how other people might perceive me. And the most common thing we think about when we think about branding is the visual side of things. So logos, websites, social media, that kind of thing. But there's actually 3 categories we should think about: visuals, actions, and stories. So let's take a look at some of the examples of visual elements that contribute to creating a personal brand. These are the things we think about most often when we think about personal branding. And now that we've started to define our brand, we can start to look at some of these elements and make sure they're actually aligned with our brand. The next step was actions, or we could call them behaviors. It's hard to say. Are our behaviors reflected in our brand values? So remember we talked about before about how our brand is what other people say about us. So would the people that we deal with daily, whether it's on Zoom calls, face-to-face, on email, social media, do our behaviors reflect our brand? So let's use an example. If we pick one of these, if one of our brand values was being inclusive, we might decide that we don't want to swear in social media posts because that would offend people who don't like swearing. But then if let's look at somebody who's got a very strong personal brand. I'll use Gary Vaynerchuk, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, as an example. He swears every single video, I guarantee he swears at least once. It's just part of his brand. And so I would say one of his biggest brand values is authenticity. He's very authentic, he's very raw, he's very real. So just because one person decides that they don't want to swear in their content and somebody else does, it's got to match with their brand. And considering these things, there's some of these things on screen. Do you share personal content on social? Do you use humor in the workplace? How do you give feedback? Do you always reply? It sounds a bit extreme to start considering this stuff. And you don't have to go through, this isn't a finite list, by the way. This is just a few ideas that I had when I was preparing the presentation. You can probably think of hundreds more of different behaviors that we demonstrate in our lives, in the workplace, especially. But it doesn't mean you have to go through these questions and answer them one by one. It just means that once you started to think intentionally about your brand, the way that you behave on a daily basis, it starts to change and to manifest based on your brand values. The third category was stories, and we've already talked about how getting our experiences and stories down on paper, but this is actually applying those stories to our brand. And we can be really intentional about how we use this within the conversations we have, within our blog posts, within the copy on our website, when you're speaking on podcasts and speaking at conferences. And if we go back to the Gary Vaynerchuk example, perfect example, he was an immigrant. He moved to America when he was 3 years old, had a tough childhood at school, got really bad grades, left school when he was 14 to work for the family business. And it's, all part of the story he weaves into being an entrepreneur and how he came from a kind of rags to riches background. And we've all got a story, haven't we? And it probably doesn't sound very sexy in your head because you know yourself so well and you think, well, I haven't got much to tell. But once you start getting things down on paper, you start seeing the threads and seeing the stories. And this is where it helps having somebody else help you as well, because they'll start spotting things that you have taken for granted. But then you can start weaving some of these concepts into your own brand. Right, so the next step in the process is the most important step, but it's probably something people quite often don't do because it's scary, and that's defining your focus. So it's a simple process. You just have to answer 2 simple questions. Who are you going to help and how are you going to help them? And if you want to build a successful brand, you have to help somebody. You can't just talk about yourself. That's not a way to build a brand. It has to be that you're delivering value and helping somebody. So the idea of picking a focus is that, and I think this quote's great. When you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. We've got to be a bit more specific about what we're talking about. And I'm going to tell you a story. I know this firsthand. So when I first started freelancing, everyone said, right, put a website up and start writing a blog. People will start reading your blogs and contacting you, and you'll be able to sell e-learning to them. Great, I thought. So I started a blog. Now, I didn't really know what to write about. I knew that it was obviously going to be about e-learning, but I didn't really know who was going to be reading it. And I didn't really know, what I should be writing about. So one week I might write about articulate storyline. And the next week I might write about freelancing. And the next week I might write about gamification. And the next week I might write about how to launch a learning management system. And you know what happened? Not much. Not many people were reading my blogs. I didn't get many comments. I got very few shares. I didn't get many clients because they'd read my blogs. It was just a bit of a mishmash, and it was very bland and unfocused. So when you get more specific about this, it's a much faster way to build your brand, because you'll start getting a name for yourself within a certain topic or within a certain industry. And the other benefit is that it's so much easier to think of ideas. Like if I think about my own situation now, if I go back to that situation 5 years ago, I used to sit there in front of Squarespace and sit there for like an hour thinking, oh, what should I write about today? I had no idea what to write about. If I look at my situation now, I've got a list of about 150 videos I want to make for my YouTube channel. I just haven't got time to make them all. And every day, every time I get a question from somebody, it sparks an idea. Oh, I know who I'm speaking to. I know how I can help them. And it sparks ideas for content. So when you're thinking about starting to focus, one of the immediate objections that people sort of give is that, you know so much stuff. Why do you want to focus on one thing? Or so many, how to work in so many different industries. Why do you want to focus on one thing? And it's kind of like a fear of missing out. So why would you want to limit yourself to just one topic or one audience? Well, I really like this diagram. This is taken from a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. If you haven't read this, I really recommend it. I'm currently halfway through reading it for the second time. And the idea is, in these two examples, we've got the same amount of energy being put into a project. In the first example, this is the example I talked about, my example from a few years ago, where I was doing so many different things. I was spreading myself so thin. I was working bloody hard, but I was going in so many different directions. I wasn't making progress. But in the second example, I'm now much more focused. I know who I'm talking to. I know how I'm helping them. And I'm seeing much more progress because of that. And I'll go back to Gary Vaynerchuk as an example, probably one of the strongest personal brands out there. He talks about everything from entrepreneurship to mindset to parenting to social media. So you're probably sitting there thinking, well, hang on a minute, you're talking about focusing. Why, how come Gary Vaynerchuk gets to talk about so many different things? Well, the key to Gary Vaynerchuk's success is that originally he didn't talk about loads of things. He talked about one very specific thing, really random thing. He had a YouTube channel talking about, he did reviews on different types of wines. And it was only when he became well known and he became established, then that's when he was able to talk about more topics, because he had a name, he had an audience, he had a personal brand that people were listening to. So he started off. Sorry, just heard a little voice in my head. He started off very, very specifically, and then he went more broadly afterwards. And that might be a scary idea to start specific. So you can almost go in a kind of broad format to begin with, just to try out a few ideas, then get specific. And then once you've got a name for yourself, then you can branch out again afterwards. But it's quite important to be strategic about this. So how do you focus? This is something that's sometimes called positioning, sometimes called niching or niching if you're in America, or sometimes called specializing. There are two ways to pick a niche or to pick a focus: horizontally or by market vertical. It seems that when you're building a personal brand, picking a horizontal niche is an easier way to get started. So I'm going to focus on that today. Although you could look at a vertical niche, which would be like by an industry. But here are some different examples of ways that you could pick a focus. Now, this definitely isn't a finite list. I just went through and picked out like 38. There's 38 items listed here. the 38 trends that I thought were relevant to learning design. So let's take an example. Let's imagine that you get really inspired by this conversation today, or this learning conference has really inspired you, and you want to go away and you want to start a podcast and build your personal brand. You've got two choices. Let's imagine you're going to start a blog tomorrow, and the blog's irrelevant. It might be a YouTube channel, it might be a podcast, it might be an email newsletter, it might be a Twitter account. The medium is irrelevant. We'll talk about that later. You could write 38 blog posts tomorrow, and you could pick every single topic that you can see on screen here and write one blog post about each of them. Okay? Or another option would be to pick one of these topics and write 38 blog topics. So let's pick one as an example. Let's pick out storytelling. So storytelling in learning design. Now, if you wrote 38 blog posts about if you wrote 38 blog posts about storytelling in learning design, and if we use recognition as our metric of success, so the amount of shares, the amount of comments, the amount of likes, the amount of invitations you get to speak at learning conferences, the amount of invitations you get to write guest blog posts, the amount of invitation you get to speak on podcast, if we use that as our metric of success, you're going to make a lot more progress if you focus on one topic and write 38. Obviously not going to be the same. They're going to be variations on the same topic, because you will now be the go-to person for storytelling in learning design. And I'm sure you can think of people in our industry, or outside of our industry as well, who are well known for having an expertise in that specific topic. And then once you've got that name, once you've got that audience, you can then start talking about other things. But that's going to be like a way to supercharge your progress. Now, some of the objections that people often talk about when it comes to making this decision on focusing. I just want to go through some of these objections. I'll miss out on opportunities. So there's often a fear about specializing because it seems counterintuitive. If you have lots of skills, you have lots of experience in different industries, and you only focus on one, then you're going to miss out on opportunities. If somebody comes to your website and they're looking for skills in mobile learning, but you're talking about storytelling, aren't you going to miss out on opportunities? Well, what I've noticed, and what I've seen in my own life, and what I've heard from other people who've been through this process, is that you go from having very few opportunities. Remember the story I talked about earlier about me putting up my blogs, writing loads of blog posts, nobody reading them. You go from having very few opportunities to having lots of excellent opportunities, because you're now the go-to person for that one thing. I don't want to be pigeonholed. Remember that Gary Vaynerchuk example? This isn't a permanent focus. Unless you're really dedicated, you're not going to be getting this tattooed on your forehead. So you're simply focusing on one topic or one market in order to build your brand. And then once you have some exposure, you can then be in a position to start talking about other things as well, because you've got an audience. People want to hear your opinion. I'll get bored is another common objection. And I know that, speaking for myself, once you're focused on something, you can really dig into that topic in a lot more depth, and you become an expert at it. And you find that it's like opening one door, and there's a whole nother set of doors to open. And I don't know what to focus on is a common objection when people are starting out. And I totally get that. So if you are just starting out, you could just maybe pick out 2 or 3 topics that you're interested in, or that you feel passionate about. And just to see what resonates, you could do, let's say, 9 blogs, 3 on 3 topics, and see which ones gets the most engagement. But just be aware that by picking several, you're going to be moving in lots of different directions, and your success and your your success is going to be slower. Your growth is going to be slower. The final part of focusing is to identify who you're creating content for. So let's imagine you've decided that you want to start a YouTube channel where you're going to be reviewing learning management systems. So the language that you use might be different if you're aiming your YouTube videos at learning management system administrators versus if you are aiming your videos at HR managers. So your LMS administrators probably want to get really technical. How does the reporting functionality work? How does that, how do the features work? Really get into the system. Whereas an HR manager might want a higher level review that talks about pricing and duration of contracts and that kind of thing. So identifying who you're talking to is really, really critical. So for me, I know that my audience is freelance instructional designers. So when I make a new video, I will all the time I'm talking about clients and client projects instead of talking about like managers and salaries. I'm talking about contracts, in the freelance world. So that difference seems small, but when you actually talk to somebody specific, you really resonate with them, and you're much likely to form a stronger connection, and that your brand will grow quicker. Right, the third step is delivering value. So I could have called this marketing, but it would have ruined my pretty develop, define, deliver thing that we've got going on here. So deliver value. This is important because this is where you're delivering value to the people that you've identified as your audience. And the 3 steps that I always think about, this is something I heard about when I started my business and I started learning about marketing. The 3 steps you want to think about, and think about this for yourself as well. Think about the brands and the people that you follow. The 3 steps you need to follow within this is to know, you first off start by knowing somebody. So somebody comes into your awareness somehow, somebody recommends them, or you see it pop up in your social media feed. You start to know that person. The next step would be that you start to like them. So you might have read 3 or 4 of their blog posts and you think, okay, this guy knows what he's on about. Or you've watched a few videos and you think, yeah, I kind of like this stuff. This is good. And then the final step in the journey is to trust somebody. So once you've started watching a few videos and you start really believing in what that person says, you start trusting them. And that's the place we want to be, is when people start trusting us, that they start recommending our things to other people, they start buying our products, and that's the journey we want to take people on. So there are thousands of ways that we can use marketing to go through this process of know, like, trust. And these are all marketing tactics, okay? And when you're starting a personal brand, or you're starting a freelance business, or you're whatever you're doing out in public, it's easy to get overwhelmed with all the different tactics out there. Oh, you should start a Facebook group. Oh, you should start a LinkedIn profile. Oh, start tweeting about your experiences. Start a blog, start a podcast, start a YouTube channel. We hear so many voices telling us to do all these different things and how great they are, but we have to remember they're just tactics, okay? And the best advice I heard, and I haven't always lived by it, but I really try to, is to pick one primary marketing tactic and one secondary marketing tactic. And that's enough. Stop there, because there's more than enough opportunity, if you do that, to deliver tons of value. So you want to pick tactics that align with your own likes and dislikes. So for me, obviously, my primary tactic is YouTube. I really sort of fell in love with the process of making videos. I love the platform. When I was living in Bali, we didn't have a TV, so I would spend a lot of time watching YouTube videos, and I fell in love with that content creation process. My secondary tactic is LinkedIn, and you've probably seen me posting left, right, and center on LinkedIn. So that's the sort of a secondary tactic I've used as well. Now, I have used other tactics as well, and the great thing about tactics is you're not stuck on them forever, but the more consistent you can be and the longer you stick to a specific tactic, the more successful you're going to be. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, okay, this is all great, but I'm just starting out my career, or I'm relatively early in my carear, and I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert in anything. How can I, do a blog about storytelling when I'm not an expert in it? Or how can I write a blog about e-learning in the travel industry because I'm not an expert? One of the key things, and again, we've got this man, Gary Vaynerchuk, helping me with the presentation today. One of the things he said that's always stuck with me is to document, don't create. I've also heard this being talked about in the learning development space as working out loud. So the idea is that rather than coming up with these perfectly crafted messages, these perfectly crafted ideas of something groundbreaking that everyone in the world is going to be amazed at, you don't have to do that. You just have to share your journey. So let's imagine that you've picked, storytelling as an example. So can you think of an example when you've used storytelling in a project that you've worked on? If so, maybe it was terrible. Maybe it was a really bad example and the project failed and it was terrible. Let's share that. Let's put that out there, and you'll have learned something from that process. So you can obviously craft it in a way that sounds like, you learned something from the process. You can probably start speaking to other people about their experiences of using storytelling in learning design. You'll start spotting it. Once you've picked your focus, you'll start spotting articles, you'll start spotting videos that talk about these things, and you'll start pulling it out. For me now, so often I'll read emails or blog posts or watch YouTube videos, and my mind immediately goes, how can I use this information to help my audience? Because I think it can be very helpful. So it's a case of then taking that content and reshaping it for my audience. So don't worry too much if you're not an expert, and none of us are the finished articles. We're always learning and growing. If you're just in a place where you don't feel like you have all the answers, that's totally fine. But start sharing your story in a specific area, and that's going to lead to some momentum, and eventually you will build up some expertise and authority in that specific topic.
Nice work, Ant. I will wrap you up here and just say, back you up with the experimentation. People in the chat are just saying this is such great advice, and they'd love you to share your stuff afterwards, maybe on LinkedIn. We've already got people basically going, join his Slack group, all that jazz. Check him out on YouTube. Everyone out there, reflect, take one action that you are going to take from this presentation with Ant, put it into action right after the learning conference. We'll be back with you shortly in about 3 minutes with our next speaker. Give a round of applause for Ant.
Thanks very much for having me.